Hello and welcome. I am Scarpalock and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server. We are with Quintessence last, who is our level 41 brute with 11 million XP earned and 800,000 to go to get to level 42 in our next 3 enhancement slots, 30 million influence, and we've just begun a story arc for Madeline Casey. We are facing the Carnival of Shadows. I've done a few missions against them. They're okay. I'm not going to up the number to ×2 just because of how long these missions take. We're going to go to +3. Once we get to our next level, we'll put enhancement slots on focused accuracy and get the endurance reduced, and then we will be able to run with that as much as we need it whenever we face the +4s. So run a story arc to investigate a wild party being thrown by the Carnival of Shadows, and we'll be fighting Carnival. So it should be pretty cool. One thing that's really useful about this character is we do have the ability to gain endurance by AoEing the enemy, and so when a bunch of them go unconscious and happen to catch me in their endurance draining radius, I can just go to the next spawn and suck up their endurance and get my endurance right on back, which is great. Super useful. This character is kicking butt and taking aims. And I am, as I've said, very much enjoying the brute. As we go, I'd like to discuss the concept. This has come up in a conversation that I had with somebody in private messages, and then it also ended up coming up separately on another thread. This is the concept of the rule of cool, and when GMs should allow players to break the rules because breaking the rules at this moment is cool. And there are a couple of different philosophies about this. So let me define kind of what I mean by it. Oh, these guys are a bit of a pain, so I'm going to go ahead and put the focused accuracy on right here. So let me define what I mean by the rule of cool. In any role-playing game, that's a tabletop, right? This pretty much applies only to tabletop. Obviously, in City of Heroes, unless you have found a bug that was not intended by the developers, there isn't any way to break the rules of the game because everything is encoded into the code, and you can't make the code do something it wasn't programmed to do. So we're only talking about tabletop games and games that are administered by human beings and not by programmed code. Because generally, in a coded game, you simply cannot break the rules. The programming doesn't allow it. And if they find out that you've broken the rules, they will patch the code, right? So in a tabletop role-playing game, the rule of cool is that it says that when something could happen in-game, when the players try to do something and it would be cool, fun, engaging, exciting, awesome, whatever, to let them do it, that the game master should allow it on the basis that it's cool. And that you're better off allowing them to do cool things than stopping them from doing cool things and having it be boring, right? And as a general rule, it's certainly true that you don't want the game to be boring. So the rule of cool says, basically, at sort of a basic level, look at this. I took off focus accuracy and we can't hit it all. That if it's cool, you should do it. What is going on here? I have a 42% chance to hit. How am I missing this much? Let's put the focus accuracy back on. Let's do a soul drain. So, the rule of cool says that it would be really cool for Captain America to defeat Thanos in this battle. And so even though Thanos' defenses are so high that Captain America technically can't even overcome his PDED during the fight, it's cool if it works because he just made this really cool speech and the roleplay is really awesome, and it would just be so cool here if Captain America defeated Thanos, so the GM just fudges the rolls and lets him win. That's rule of cool. But there are different kind of layers to this, or levels of allowing it, right? It's one thing to say, well, technically Thanos has a 75 PDED, and Captain America's maximum attack only does 50 damage, so he shouldn't be able to damage Thanos here. I'm going to let him do it. That's not really breaking the rules, because the rules say that, damage that exceeds the defense gets through. What the GM has every right to do is say, I'm going to lower his defense. The rules don't tell you how much defense Thanos has to have, or how much attack Captain America has to do. They're just telling you how much damage a 10 die 6 energy blast does, or a 15 die 6 punch, and what a 30 PDED will do when attacked with 40 stun of damage. And so, so one level is, I'm not necessarily changing the rules, I'm just going to lie about the stats, right? Another level is to say, I'm going to change how the rules work, or how the rules are interpreted, because it would be cooler to interpret them a different way, right? So this would be saying that according to the rules, Captain America's attack normally doesn't do knockback. But because it would be cool to have the knockback, I realize what happened. I was terrorized, and that's why I was missing. Okay, sorry to be distracted there. That Captain America's attacks are defined as not doing knockback. But because Thanos is standing right in front of some device that will destroy him if he gets knocked back into it, we're going to say that for the purpose of this battle, Captain America's attack does do knockback. We're going to ignore that the attack is a no knockback attack, right? That's not lowering Thanos' defense. That's changing the rules of how Captain America's attack works. And so there are kind of different... There's a whole sort of sliding scale of how much you're altering or fudging or changing or breaking the rules for coolness' sake. And various groups of people are comfortable with different levels of tweaking to the rules for the sake of coolness. And so this particular person who made the thread was talking about how in their game, the players think that the rule of cool should be paramount, and so does the GM. And so there are lots of times when the game master basically ignores the rules, or rules that things will not work the way it says in the rule book, because it would be cooler if they didn't. And this particular player is frustrated by that. And one example that he gave is the cleric is trying to cast a Cure Wounds spell, and that spell requires you to have a hand free to do the somatic gestures, I guess. And so what the player is trying to do is, he was holding a sword and a shield, and he didn't want to drop the sword and the shield. So he said, I'm going to do the somatic gestures with my foot. That is blatantly against the rules. The rules clearly state that the somatic gesture has to be done with your hands, and that it has to be done with a free hand. It can't be done when you have your hands full of other items. And this is a purposeful restriction that they placed on the rules. Now, the Game Master has a right to say, I'm going to rule that this spell doesn't use a somatic gesture. And they even have a right to say that in my game, somatic gestures can be done with your feet, right? But it's massively changing the rules on how this spell works, because you think it would be cool in this case. And so then there have been arguments on that thread about the pros and cons of doing house ruling and that sort of thing regarding the rule of cool. And how, some players think, oh, it's cool, do it. Other players think it's against the rules, you shouldn't do it. And so where I stand on this is, the rule of cool is great, but I think that all game masters need to avoid very carefully being arbitrary. And what it sounds like this game master is doing, right, is arbitrarily deciding when something sounds cool to him to allow it. And then if it doesn't sound cool to him, he doesn't allow it. And the problem with this is then it leads to very inconsistent rulings. And worse, it could potentially be unfair to an individual player, because if I'm really good at persuading the game master that my idea is cool and he allows it, and you're not as savvy about persuading the game master that what you want to do is cool, then we have a situation in which one player is being allowed to break the rules over and over again, and another player is being held to the rules. And that's sort of unfair. I'll continue this thought after we speak to Madeline. Almost everybody at that party died. Quintessence last. How awful. That woman you rescued sounded apathetic afterwards. It's not natural. The carnival did something to her. I know it. I think I have a lead. I have an idea as to how to investigate, but I'd rather not tell you just yet. Okay. Then she says, "You're going to be mad at me, Quintessence last, but I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went to one of the Carnival of Shadows parties last night. I wanted to help you investigate those mysterious deaths that occurred at their party. Anyway, I'm sorry, but I actually don't remember much about it. I could learn to live with my lost memories, but when I came home, I was also missing my grandmother's ruby pendant. Please get the pendant back for me. The carnival must have taken it." All right, well, it's all the way in Craze Folly, so we'll just teleport to the mission door. So I think that probably the worst thing, continuing this thought, the worst thing that a dungeon master or a game master could really do is be arbitrary. To allow things some days and not other days, based on their mood, based on how cool somebody said the thing was to do. Arbitrary is unfair as a game master. And this is what I was talking about before. Let me give you a simple example, and I gave this example in the thread. I can give you a simple example. My friend and I had a disagreement about the spell Counterspell. I believe he is working off of how that spell works in the show Critical Role. I've only seen it, I think, used once, and I don't really remember the details, but from what I gather in that show, the GM will tell the players a spell is being cast, let's say Fireball, and he will then allow the player who has Counterspell to react to it and say, all right, I'm going to Counterspell the Fireball. He'll even apparently tell them the level at which the spell is being cast, so they can decide what level to cast Counterspell, so they cast it at a high enough level that it counters. Now, if that's the way they want to play the game, that's up to them, right? But it isn't how the spell is written in the rulebook. There's absolutely nothing in the spell's text that indicates that the spell would give you any particular knowledge of what spell is being cast as it's being cast. And as a matter of fact, if you read the rules in the expansion book called Xanathar's Guide to Everything, they even say that if you want to identify a spell as it's being cast, you have to make a skill check as a reaction. Now, in Dungeons and Dragons, each character can take one reaction per turn. And so and Counterspell is also a reaction. So if you spend your reaction to identify a spell, you will not have a reaction left to use Counterspell. If you spend the reaction to Counterspell, you won't be able to identify it. This effectively means that you have to Counterspell all enemy spells blind. You have to decide before you know what the enemy's casting, whether you want to burn Counterspell on it or not. And of course, this makes Counterspell a lot less powerful because the guy might be casting, Cure Wounds on himself, and there's no point to countering that. You want to counter the enemy's Fireball. And there was a long thread about this on D&D Beyond, and one of the DMs pointed out that if you make it blind like this, it makes it tactically interesting. That an enemy can lure you into doing a counterspell on a weak spell and waste your counterspell and then throw the real spell. So I said, okay, well, it's the way it says in the rules, so we're going to do it that way. So I then made a house rule about it, and I posted it, and I said, here's the house rules, and one of the house rules was, we're going to follow the rules as written for Counterspell. Well, my friend, who is used to the way they do it on Critical Role, didn't like it. He had been envisioning his sorcerer being able to counterspell any enemy spell that he just didn't want to go off. As soon as I tell him a cool spell, he's like, I'm countering that. And now he finds out that, well, he's got to counter it whether he knows it's a cool spell or not. And that I might be able to trick his sorcerer, like sort of out his sorcerer into counterspelling some sort of a weak level 1 or cantrip spell, and then the real spell comes out and he's already wasted his counterspell and he can't counter it. So we had a conversation about that, and he sort of successfully convinced me not so much that counterspells should work any differently, but that there's no point to identifying a spell if it uses up your reaction and you can't do anything after you identify it, right? So now I know what the spell is as I'm taking damage from it or being mind controlled by it. Who cares? Right? Once it goes off, I'll find out what it is. The only reason to use a reaction to find out what it is so you can do something about it. And at the same time, somebody else had posted an alternate rule that he uses, and I thought, okay, this rule looks good. And it was just that if you identify a spell successfully, you are allowed, as part of the same reaction, to counter it. And I said, okay, that's fine. Right? Because he still got to waste his reaction identifying, and then if he fails the identify, then he can't counter it. And so I was okay, that makes it enough. And by the way, it, shall we say, nerfed counterspell so much that even though he agreed to that rule, he doesn't even prep it anymore. I don't think he's had it prepped since level 3 or 4, whatever. They're level 7 now. He prepped it at level 5, and then when he realized it wasn't going to be very useful to him, or wasn't going to be as uber as he wanted it to be, then he said, I guess he didn't want it, right? And again, one of the arguments of, yes, it did nerf counterspell from how he thought it should be done, right? But one of the reasons I agreed to that, or one of the reasons I made that ruling, is because I agreed to what one of the other DMs had posted, which is if you just let them know what the spell is, it makes counterspell incredibly powerful. And this is just a 3rd level spell, and it makes it one of the most powerful spells in the game. If it's one of the most powerful spells in the game, it should be a 9th level spell or an 8th level spell. And so my point here is this. I didn't just decide counterspell can work sometimes this way and sometimes another way. We talked about it. I changed the rule. I posted it to our email, and then it has worked that way ever since. I don't arbitrarily change how counterspell works based on how cool it would be for it to work one way versus another. That in this particular instance, I'm going to let counterspell, I'm going to tell you what the spell is because it would be cool to let you counter it. And the next time, I'm not going to tell you what the spell is because it wouldn't be cool to let you counter it. This is going to be a pain. But we're just going to focus on the evil mage, this soothsayer. And once we've got her down, we should be alright. These guys are really something else. Because of them being able to go unaffected like that. But I got her now. Alright, now I'm going to do my traditional run out. Because the phantoms won't disappear for a while. They're really annoying. I don't mind fighting this guy. I just don't want to deal with the phantoms. This is a great example of something I consider them to be massively unfair, because player characters' pets would not still be in the game like that. As soon as you die, all your pets die with you. So, because I consider the NPCs to basically be cheating, I refuse to engage. Anyway, so I think my main problem with the rule of cool from the DM's perspective, I'll talk about it from the player's perspective and maybe in another episode, but from the DM's perspective, the reason I don't like the rule of cool is because it leads to inconsistency and arbitrariness. It leads to, well, in this instance, it's really funny if you counterspell this spell, so I'm going to allow it. In the next instance, actually, I really think it'll be cool if I let this spell go off, so I'm going to say, you can't counter it, right? Or you can't know what it is before you counter it. And so whether you know a spell before you counter it or not is entirely based on how cool I think it would be for you to know it, rather than how the rules work. So it's okay to change things from how the rules work, even for the sake of coolness, but it needs to be consistent. It can't just be, in this moment, it would be cool to do this, so I'll allow it, but the next time you try it, I'm not going to allow it because it wouldn't be cool. That's not fair to the players, and it leads to a completely unpredictable game where the players never know. Where is this glowy? There it is. Where the players never know from session to session whether what they're going to try to do will work. There's nothing they can rely on. Right now, obviously, you don't know if it's going to work because you have to make your rolls, you have to make your saving throw or what have you. Sure, but there's a different level of inconsistency where even if I roll a 20, I don't know if this is going to work because sometimes the GM rules that it does, and sometimes he rules that it doesn't, and it's entirely based on how cool he thinks it is. That's incredibly unfair to players, and I certainly wouldn't want to play in a game like that. And I think a lot of players probably wouldn't. And I suspect the only people who would enjoy a game like that are people who are benefiting in some way from it. In other words, the person who's really good at coming up with the thing that sounds cool to convince the GM to let him do it. Those guys love the rule of cool because they can get away with all kinds of stuff that the rules say they can't. She says, "Oh, my pendant, thank you, Quintessence Last. Let me just slip it on. I promise it'll never leave my neck again." And of course we know that's going to be trouble. "Forever and ever you will serve my indomitable will." Oh my, Quintessence Last. When I put that pendant on, I was overcome. Memories, emotions, some of them were mine, but most weren't. I could almost glimpse the carnival's plan. They must have infused my pendant with some of their power. Yes, you're in trouble now. Carnival Shadows definitely did something to my pendant while it was in their possession. Ever since you returned it to me, I've been recovering more and more of my memories about that party. Quintessence Last, this is awful, but I think some people died. One of them, I think his name was Nathan Crane. Yes, I'm sure that's right. I'd really like you to go over to his office and see if you can find out about the carnival. And of course, we can imagine that Nathan Crane's office is going to already be overrun with evil villains. So that discusses the rule of cool from my perspective in terms of the DM, right? That it's okay to allow things to happen that are cool, but it's not okay if this causes the rules to be arbitrarily changing from session to session or hour to hour. There needs to be a consistency. The game master needs to set up a world that can be relied upon in terms of how its rules work. I need to know when I press the space bar, super jump is going to work the same way, and it's not going to suddenly today when I log in be flight instead of super jump because the devs thought it would be cool to screw with me and give me flight today instead. Right? It just, you can't do things like that. It isn't fair to the players. Now I know that most of the time the rule of cool is being invoked to presumably help the players, but it's still difficult as a player to know where you stand if every time you start playing the game there's a possibility that the rules are going to be different from how they were before. And I think as a game master you need to make sure that you're not just making arbitrary changes to the game because, quote unquote, it sounds cool. And especially not making changes to the game for one player rather than the other players because that player is really good at coming up with cool stuff. It has to be fair and things have to work the same way for everybody. If you think about my again, the same player of mine, this same friend of mine, who I mentioned in an earlier episode, wanted an astral fragment. And I told him you can't just make up a magic item, right? And his argument was essentially the rule of cool. That it's cool for me to have this magic item. And it won't really hurt anything, and it's not that powerful, so why can't you just let me do the cool thing? And initially I said no. But then I remembered that one of the other players had used his I know a guy rule, which is, for every charisma bonus +1 and higher you have, with a minimum of one. So even if you have negative, you get one. Contact one guy that you know who can do something helpful for you. Now, I was thinking they would use these guys to help them advance parts of the story, but the first person to use their I know a guy was the cleric who had gotten ritual casting wizard spells as one of his feats, and he wanted some spell components and some spell scrolls, and he asked if he could use his I know guy to be a relative of his who is a merchant and trades in magical items and things like that, and can give him some spell components and maybe a scroll or two. And I had allowed it, right? So this is where I'm talking about being consistent and not arbitrary. It would then be, I realized, unfair to say to my friend, you can't have a minor magic item given to you by your Noah guy, but the cleric can, right? Either everyone can do it or nobody can do it, right? It's not fair to only let one player do it just because he came up with a cooler contact, right? So I said to my friend, you've got 3 Noah guys left because he started with 4 because he's a cleric and has high charisma. If you want to burn one of your I Noah guys, one of your Landos, because it's also called the Lando Calrissian rule, right? If you want to burn one of your Landos on having this person, knowing someone who could manufacture your astral fragment for you for the cost, because the cleric had to pay the cost of his spell components and stuff. It was a relative of his, but his relative said, I can't just give stuff away, and he was happy to pay for it. I gave him a discounted price. And I think the uncle said half price, and he said, no, I'll give you the full price. I don't want to hurt your business. I just want the item. So there wasn't any discounting really going on there, and it certainly wasn't free. So he's going to have to pay the cost of this magic item. But he gets it because, again, it would be arbitrary for me to say that one player can use their contact to get some cool minor magic items and the other players can't. And one of the other players also has a contact, and I'm going to tell her, the new player, I'm going to say, if you want to use your contact to get a minor magic item, you can do the same, right? Fair is fair. If the other characters can do it, so can she. Now, she's really smart, and she's been a DM a lot, and I suspect that she's not going to waste her contact on something as ridiculously trivial as a minor magic item. It's just, to me, such a waste of that contact, which could be used for almost anything, right? I mean, literally, if the Emperor of Rome arrested them and said he was going to execute them, and one of them had an I know a guy left, they could literally say, I know a senator, and I want to see that senator. Maybe the senator will stick up for me against the Emperor, right? And save our lives. And instead of doing that, they're going to go get a level 2 spell scroll with their contact or something trivial like that. That's not how I would use it, but it's their contact, and they can use it however they want, right? This is a house rule, right? But again, I'm trying to apply the house rule consistently for everyone, right? I can't say, well, your idea for a contact isn't as cool as the cleric's, so I'm going to let the cleric get magic items with his contact, but not you. That wouldn't be fair, right? It would be arbitrary and inconsistent, and game masters should be fair and consistent and not arbitrary. Okay. I mean, it's okay to have some arbitrariness. Like, sometimes I'll say, look, for instance, tattoos. I don't allow them in my game. It's entirely arbitrary because I hate them. It's okay to do that as long as you say they're not allowed. What would be arbitrary would be for me to say, you can have a tattoo because your character sketch is cool and has a tattoo on it, but nobody else gets a tattoo. That's arbitrary, right? So what I'm arguing here is you shouldn't be arbitrary and you should try to be consistent. Now, that's all from the DM's perspective of when the DM should allow for the rule of cool. But the other thing I want to talk about is from the player's perspective. When players are asking to be allowed to do something quote unquote because it's cool. And sometimes it just is cool that they're asking something cool that they're asking to do. But frankly, a lot of times I think what they're asking to do is be overpowered. And they're defending it by saying it's creative or cool to do. So again, when we think about the cleric who wanted to use his big toe to be to do the somatic gestures of the spell and touch the victim to do his cure wounds instead of his hands because it was a more powerful option. He could still keep his weapon and his shield in his hands, right? That he's not asking to do that because it's cool or even in character. He's asking to do that because it's making his character more powerful than the rules say it should be, right? So here what you're saying is being more powerful is cooler. This makes me more powerful. It's cool, let's do it, right? And I think that is also a major factor. It's a min-maxing technique. It's a power gaming technique. It makes me cooler to be more powerful, so I want to be able to do it. I can do 3 things with my 2 hands instead of 2 if you let me do one of the things that I'm supposed to do with my hands with my pinky toe instead. The GM says, yeah, that's cool. I'll allow it, right? What happened? The player is allowed to make his character be more powerful than the rules say. He's arguing that it's the rule of cool, but what it really is the rule of min-maxing. And I feel like this happens an awful lot when the game master is being asked to allow something because it would be cool. It's often allowing something that is more powerful than what the rules say you're allowed to do. Think of my friend, by the way, the same guy that plays the sorcerer, who made up Titanos, the growing and density increasing superhero. In our campaign, where 70 active points was the maximum, and your strength is equal to active points, his density increase and strength, when they were both turned on, he's like 30 feet tall, and I can't remember how much more dense than a normal human mass. He had an 85 strength, which was 15 points above the maximum allowed. He was doing 17 dice 6 of damage when 14 dice 6 of normal damage was the maximum we allowed. And if you peel apart my friend's argument and get down to the very core of it, his fundamental argument about why we should allow Titanos to have 15 more strength than was legal in our game world was because it would be cool if I do. And what did that coolness make him? Overpowered by 15 points, right? Basically 20% more powerful than the next most powerful character in the game. It wasn't about him being cool. It was about him being overpowered. And so that's the other reason I'm very cautious about the rule of cool, because the way I see it being applied most of the time is making the character be more powerful than it's supposed to be. And if you really want to be more powerful, that's okay, but be honest about it. Don't say it's about being cool or creative or recognizing the vision of my character. Admit, I want 85 strength because I want my character to be more powerful. I'm perfectly willing to have a conversation about whether your character should be more powerful, but what I'm not willing to do is say, because it would be cool, you get to break the rules in ways that make your character more powerful than it's supposed to be. Again, remember, it's already hard enough to challenge player characters. Look at this character. We're peeling through missions +2. And if we went on to ×2 or even +3 at this point, as long as we had focused accuracy running, no problem. How much easier do we need it to be? Do I have to say, give my character double defense, developers, because it would be cool for me to be unhittable? I'm already hard enough to hit that the enemies can't challenge me unless it's like a +3 elite boss. Okay? So how much more powerful does this character need to be, and how much easier do I need the game to be? Because when you're saying, I want to be cool, and really mean I want my character to be more powerful, what you're saying is, I want the game to be easier. Is it really the case that easy makes it cool. For me, and I think for a lot of people, the challenge and overcoming that challenge is a lot cooler than just sleepwalking through everything. But that's my opinion, and I'm sure lots of people don't share it and think that it's cool to just own the map. Let's talk to Madeline Casey. She says, so Nathan Crane was investigating the carnival, huh? I guess that's why they murdered him. Maybe he was getting close to something. We'll have to keep digging, Quintessence lass. I've got to find out why he died. And we will do that, but we will do that in another episode. We're getting very close to level 42. I hope everybody's enjoying. I am as well. And until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server.